You're fairly lucky this morning. Not only do you have me to take you through for the next 60 minutes, you've also managed to squeeze yourselves into a fairly popular session. It's always nice to see that I've picked a topic that people like. I'm also incredibly excited to present this session. This session is something that has kind of grown over time as I've grown through my usage of Tableau. You can think of it almost as things that I've learnt that I wish that I knew years ago. So my name is Tom Christian. I am a solutions consultant here at Tableau. And the reason why I've picked dashboard design and visualization best practice as my topic today is, I will use the clicker, is I'm a visualization designer myself. I never used to be. It's something that grew on me. I've actually used Tableau for 4 years now. When it first came to me, I went, holy crap, this is so much better than Excel. If any of you are familiar with Bethany Lyons, you should check out her work. She's amazing. I think she showed me a bar chart and a scatter plot, and I just went, I want that. That's what I want. That evolved into things like very topical football-related visualizations. I've progressed into the world of finance, so things like cryptocurrencies were popular for a bit. Some of you may have made lots of money and then saw it all disappear like I did. Hard times, I don't want to talk about it again. Or you may look at kind of computer game things. Basically what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter the topic. No matter what you want to pick in Tableau, you can build something and very easily make it look good. That's the aim for today's topic, to give you a few tips and tricks that you can do the same. So again, the focus of today's session is all around this concept of good design. And when I say good design, I mean things like, what is good design? What does it mean? When we say something is designed well, what does that mean to anybody? What are the steps you can take? How can you actually travel from nothing to something that looks beautiful? And the key tips and tricks that you'll actually need to take away with you to the office. I would say Friday morning, but I'll give you a weekend and say Monday, that you can apply to your own work. Oh, I will say just before I move on, lots of people in the room. But if there are questions, I'm happy to take them at the end. So I'm more than happy if anybody's got anything really burning that they want to ask. So a picture of me there. I normally wear glasses. A lot of today's session is, so we'll look at that understanding design. So the core concepts that make design work. We'll find the how. So find the ways to get there. Unicorns, who doesn't love them? That's my way of saying tips and tricks. I don't know why, it works. But the main thing that I want you to keep in mind is the common mistakes to avoid. It's all well and good saying, here are things that are good, but unless you know the things to avoid, then the good things are kind of irrespective. And a core point of today's session is I want you to be in some way inspired to at least start going out to Tableau Public and rock out with your Viz out, both in public and the office. So a lot of this content will be applicable to Tableau Public. If you haven't seen Tableau Public or are unaware of it, then go out there, check out the examples, contribute your own work. A lot of this content will relate to that, but importantly, I want to make sure that this content relates to the stuff that you do in your day jobs as well. Otherwise, what's the point in learning it? So who in this room has a form of a design degree in any way? Thank God. What I'm about to do is bastardize design in not only the next 50 minutes, but especially on this slide. I don't have one personally, which is why I'm going to bastardize it. The last time I presented this session, it was in front of 2,000 people in Las Vegas. 25% of the room maybe put their hand up, and I freaked out. The first thing I'm going to apologize for is if you do talk to a friend of yours that happens to know design in any way, then don't ever tell them that UX and UI is the same thing. It's not. I learned that the hard way. But When it comes to Tableau, they kind of intermingle, I'm going to say it, and we'll roll with it. But where this all stems from is roughly 2 years ago. I was talking to a customer. We'd been talking for a while. I'd been helping them improve their dashboards. And they turned around and said, "Tom, you've given me a problem. All this is great. I can see the value that Tableau brings. But you've given me a problem in terms of I now need to think and act like a designer. Before, when I used Excel, people would be happy getting a table of numbers, and that's what they would come to expect from Excel. But with Tableau, people expect a bit more. It looks pretty, so people expect prettier. But I see that as not just a challenge, but an opportunity to do better still. That's the reason we're all here. So UX, user experience, user interaction, these aren't new concepts. They shouldn't be brand new to people. But there are a few core principles that relate around this topic of design that we'll refer back to throughout today's session. The first of that is, does your work leave a good impression? So the stuff that you do, when somebody navigates to your dashboard the first time, are they going to go, "Ooh, is that pretty?" Or are they going to go, "Oh, where do we start?" The next question you need to ask yourselves is this digestible and clear? In other words, once they've come to your dashboard, they've got a good first impression. It entices them to be there a bit longer. In that next 3 to 5 seconds that they look at it, do they know where to look? Are they cluttered with tables and overloaded with visualizations? Or is it clear enough that they understand the message behind it very quickly? The next is an interesting one, and it's something that feel free to challenge, especially when you build your own work. But a lot of the time, people work to get this sense of familiarity within their work, which basically means that is the data displayed in the way that somebody recognizes? In fact, for those of you that are looking for a great example of good design, you should check out Iron Viz tomorrow on stage. It's going to be incredible. The things that people will build in 20 minutes will put me to shame with all my experience, which makes me very sad. But some of the times they'll challenge this sense of building things in a way that's familiar. For example, if you're expected to look at countries, you might look at a map. But sometimes that's not always the best way. And we'll talk more about that later. Next is this idea of delighting somebody. So already we've gone through the fact that somebody should be happy just to look at your work. They should understand it. It should speak to them in a language that they understand. But that next point is, when they actually use it, are they going to be excited by the fact that things work in the way that they expect it to? If they click something, will everything filter in the way they expect it to? And the last one is possibly the most important one. So this is the concept that it shouldn't distract the user from the message that you're trying to tell them. There are many ways that you can distract people and tell them things that you didn't actually mean to do. There are lots of ways that you can actually put things on a visualization and lose your message in a sea of noise. But importantly, if you try and focus on not distracting your audience and making your message as clear as possible, then all the rest will kind of fall into place. So we're going to start from that base layer, the kind of basics of this design. And the first part of it is this whole discovery process. For some of you in the room, this may feel like a refresher, but it's just important to understand where Tableau can be different. So discovery is always a process. Whenever you're building anything in Tableau, you should always be constantly asking questions, not only of yourself and what are we even doing here in this conference, but of whatever it is that you're doing. So the first thing you can ask is, what does your data consist of? What are the fields? What are the dimensions, the measures? And then we go into, what business questions should we actually ask of this data? So whenever I talk to customers and they say, how should we start building things in Tableau? Should I whiteboard? Should I put up a PowerPoint presentation and drag all the charts that I think should be built and then figure out how to do it in Tableau? The answer is no. The first thing after you figure out what data you're looking at is what are the bits of value people want to get out of this? The last thing is who are you actually presenting this back for? Is this going to business line managers, your exec team, the guy that sits next to you? What are the questions that they're going to ask, and what do they expect to see off the back of it? And if they ask for a table, you tell them you're doing it wrong. How this differs, and going off that point I was saying before, is if we call it old world BI, classic BI, lots of words like that get bandied around. What that really means in that kind of pixel perfect dashboard world is your process starts like this. You go, I would like to build a dashboard. You go, okay, I'm going to build a dashboard. It should probably look something like this view on the left. Yep, that said right before. I don't know directions. It should look like this view on the left. And do you know what? We'll figure out the data as we build it. I'm going to plug and play some things into this. That middle thing will probably be categories and sales. The one on the right will be, I don't know, my subcategory split. The one on the left will be sales over time, something along that, but we'll figure it out as we get there. And this approach is great if your end goal is, I'm going to build something that looks snazzy for a PDF printout. But this isn't insight driven. There's no part of this design process that you go, I need to find an answer to a question and then find out the drivers behind that question. It's not. It's being driven from, I want something to look at that somebody will eventually ask me for in a board meeting. So how does the Tableau approach differ slightly? So it's data discovery led. And the first place where it starts is going, I want to understand my data itself. I'm actually going to ask questions of my data, and the view that it creates will actually be secondary. We'll iterate over time over these views, but to begin with, I want to find out the things that are going to add value to my business. So you follow this trail of insight. You ask questions on questions. You bring in other bits of data that you didn't think was relevant, but all of a sudden you see correlation. And over time, this combines together to create a story. The great thing about taking this approach is you'll end up finding questions or asking questions, finding answers to things that you didn't even consider asking in the first place. Things that actually truly tell you answers. The best thing about this is actually data analysis. The amount of people I talk to that say, I want to analyze my data and then go, I'm going to build a dashboard without thinking of any process of any bit of analytics in that process is incredible. And you shouldn't feel bad if that's the approach you take. We've all been there. I've been there. This approach to building is unnatural. It's especially if you've worked with old classic BI approach. This is completely different, and it's going to feel weird. And I work in an enterprise space, and many people that eventually touch Tableau have been fed almost through that kind of report factory type approach, so that by the time they get to building something, they've got a list of, here are the criteria that you must meet. It must have a chart at the top and a table. And it doesn't really give that insight-driven approach. But I'm not going to evangelize and change the world, but at least if I talk to you guys in the room, then maybe somebody can. To show you this in practice, I'm actually going to just stop for a second. So all of the work that I'm showing generally is on Tableau Public. Again, I've mentioned it before, but you can go out there, find this content, download it for yourselves, figure out how it's built. This is one of mine. If it's not one of mine, I'll put the person's name next to it so you know who to go and stalk. But this is just something that I showed to you. Again, I work in finance. And although this is a finished dashboard, this came from a set of questions. And to show you the questions that it came from, double clicked. The first is, what's the current fund state of this imaginary asset management group? The next is, what are our most important categories? How is each team member in this fictional asset management firm performing? For those of you that spotted, the second one is actually my name, and I wish I was a successful investment manager doing that well, but I'm not. And then the last is, who are my top and 5 bottom stocks? These are the key questions that have driven this dashboard. And the great thing about building something for interactivity is actually each one of these views answers a specific question. They're not overloaded with content. They're fairly simple and straightforward. But the moment you add interactivity in this view, you can start asking questions like, what are my top and bottom per category, because they link? What are my top and bottom per team? And what are the underlying drivers behind each stock? I can either use Viz and Tooltips or drill through to start asking this next set of questions. Taking an example from the community, so this comes from Andy Kriebel, this reimagines the concept of a profit and loss statement. And the great thing about this is it's fairly similar. It asks straightforward questions, so what's the current position versus last year? Has it hit the target? It's got that indicator on color. What's that month-over-month change? And what's the recent trend? He's just asked the same set of questions for every single KPI. Now, funny story on this one. I actually showed this to an enterprise client that I work with, a large unnamed bank. And they went, this is incredible. I love it. I love the way that it shows these KPIs like this. I want this view. So they downloaded it and rebuilt it almost brick by brick for their own reports, which I think is incredible because actually Andy didn't even come up with this concept. It came from somebody called Lindsay Poulter. So this idea of borrowing ideas from other people in the community is incredible. You should do that all the time. And if you're not doing that, you're basically letting all this great content sit there where you can just steal their ideas or creatively borrow is the correct design term. So I won't go too much into this. Here's some concept from Ava Murray. She runs some of the Makeover Monday. You should check that out. But again, each one is built, and actually when you look at these views, you can figure out the questions that were asked of the data to then figure out how it was built. So just quickly, the one on the right actually explicitly kind of asks some of the questions. So which countries produced the most potatoes? What was their selling price, their harvest production, those type of things. So a quick refresher into that baseline of design. You should always focus on what is the most important thing from the data, what are the key questions you should ask of that data, and who is it that you're actually presenting it for. So the next topic is the first kind of tool in your armory that you can use to try and draw out some of these insights. And we're going to be looking at color. Now, when I put this on stage in Vegas, the outrage that there was a U in color, I made sure it was bright and yellow so it stood out as well. That's a color technique for you there. Also learned that they misspelled gray, but that was a side note. Color is probably, well, it's probably the most important form of visual perception. And it's one of the key ways that you actually distinguish between marks. And it can be influenced in multiple different ways. So the first is the actual hue of the color itself and how it relates to other colors around it. So if we take this square very quickly, you can see that there's a nice gradient shade. But just by swapping around purple and green, those two squares immediately clash. The next is the intensity. And the intensity is a nice way of just saying, well, actually, if I dull out some of the saturation from the same color, things can just flow together and relate, but still have some sort of standout color. An important side note on this as well, if you're ever designing something for somebody that's colorblind, changing the hue might not work for them. Some of the colors, the scope is different. But changing the intensity of the color can still make things stand out. A great use of this, especially for stories, is I've taken this from Andy Kirk within the community. And actually, if you take color away from this view, what we're just looking at is two bubble charts. But the moment you add color into this view, you immediately see red and white grapes. You immediately recognize that you're looking at wine varieties that are being produced. Which is an important point. I referenced it earlier on. But color's something that can support the view that you're trying to create, bring out those bits of insight that you're trying to drive. And if it's used incorrectly, it can really distract from what you're actually trying to show. So here at Tableau, we're constantly giving you more power when it comes to changing the scope of the color that you're looking at. And as that Spider-Man movie once said, I think it was Uncle Ben, more power equals more responsibility. It's just fact. So we've introduced things like legends per measure. And actually, I love this example. I'm forever going to use it and make fun of our marketing team. Because actually, although they were trying to show the point that you can now individually color columns, could you imagine receiving that as a report on Monday morning and just seeing this kind of throw up of colors in front of you? No, it's horrible. Don't do that. Silly marketing team. But this is Legends for Measures. This came out in 10.2. 10.4, we introduced this concept of individual shading for filters, parameters, different objects. So this is in the layout pane. This allows you to fine-tune some of that coloring just ever so slightly more. And something that gives me great joy, especially for those of you that have been around Tableau for a while, to announce is that transparency is coming to Tableau in the near future. And I'm so excited. I've in fact dedicated a slide purely to transparency. Look how transparent this slide is. Little joke there for design people. So I've had the privilege of playing with the design feature for transparency, and it actually opens up this whole new world of intricate design that wasn't possible before. So I've just put some sort of gradient color in the background, and it just adds something nice to a view. This was looking at flights and airline delays, and it just kind of makes it look like the sky. It's nice, it's pretty. This is being used well because it's, again, not distracting. It just flows in. It's not really apparent that transparency is even a big thing here. But where can you use transparency wrong? So let's take a look at this example. So transparency introduces new features into Tableau, such as pies in your pies, 3D effect maps. Don't do this. It's fun for a bit, but obviously, again, layering pie charts on top of pie charts is not a fun experience. Actually, in this example here, I've made it scientifically correct, so each sub-segment related to the larger one at one point. It still doesn't add any value whatsoever. Don't do it. But when it comes to color, there's something you should absolutely avoid at all costs. And it's something I've started to politely name unicorn puke. Now, we've all been there. It's in that design stage where you've started using Tableau, you've started to create a few charts, and they look pretty good. And then you discover that there's a color box. And that color box is very wide-ranging. It's got some interesting colors in there. And then you start using all the colors. And you don't stop. And you don't stop. And you create something that looks a bit like this, that at the time felt like a good idea. And then when you go back to it, you realize that you're a monster. But all is not lost. People say to me, how do I get around this kind of color explosion of things? And the biggest technique that I can give you, the biggest hint or tip, it's something that was passed on to me a long time ago by, again, an actual designer that I may have annoyed, saying UI and UX are the same thing. But it's this concept of fading to gray. Now, gray is probably the most powerful color, absence of color, that you can actually use. Because what it means is that any color you add, if you start from gray, is there with a meaning. So one of my favorite colors for design, for this purpose alone, is gray. And if we take this quick example here, this is looking at wealth inequality in the United States. And how they've built this view is the bottom 99% is this kind of gray area at the back, but that top 1% is the purple area at the bottom. And what it immediately draws out is the fact that that purple area is growing and growing over time. So everything else on here is gray or black. So it just means that your eyes are immediately drawn to the one thing that you should be looking at, which is that giant purple square thing, area. And now I know what you're saying to me. You're saying, Tom, when I look at colors and I look at grays, there are so many varieties of gray. I hear that there are more than 50 shades. Which one should I pick out in particular? Well, my fallback ones, audience, is hashtag EB, 9F, and 68. There was another one that was one number off that I was absolutely not going to use. I'm not that far. So we know that we can start with gray. And something I just want to show very quickly is you can actually make this shading element dynamic. So again, because I like starting with stories, there's a bit of a story behind this example. If I can... So once upon a time in this great country of ours, we made a big mistake. I won't go too much into that big mistake, but it involved a vote that shouldn't have happened. I respect everybody's view on the matter, though, so I'm not going to go too much in depth into it. But a particular event during this time that's only ever so slightly embarrassing is something that I think got called Battle of the Thames. And to narrow it down in terms of what actually happened, you can just think of grown men shouting at each other from ships that were, I call them ships, they're probably like small dinghies, floating on the River Thames, and just shouting stuff at them, at each other. And you can see in this view we've got 3 people, or 4 people that were involved in this event. So Bob Geldof, George Osborne, Michael Gove, and Nigel Farage. And during this time, this is Twitter mentions, I should add that. Twitter mentions over time, and you can see that these are the top 4 people that were mentioned. Everyone else is that gray color. So it gives us some sort of comparison relative to where they were being mentioned. And actually, if I change the time frame to earlier that week, we can see that the top 4 now is a completely different set of people. So the unfortunate Boris Johnson, the hidden David Cameron, James Dyson, great Hoovers, and again, Nigel Farage. So this gives us that scope that as we go through our data, or if our data is updating, irrespective of the topic, then those colors would be dynamic and change over time with it. If I can grab that properly. So how's this built? How's this constructed in this way? So the key behind this, and I hope this works, it does, is we're actually using a dynamic top group, which is this calculation up here, which has come up on a different screen. Uh-oh. So all I've said is if these belong in this top mentions group, show me their name, otherwise create other. This is the calculation that's driving that color spectrum behind this. Now what top mentions is this is a set. And set's one of those things that earlier in Tableau life, before LODs, before table calculations were still there, before LODs, these were used all the time, and they've kind of faded into the background a bit like everybody in gray here. But actually, they're still really powerful. And if I edit this set very quickly, you can see all I've done is I've built this off name. So the actual, this could be your customers, this could be your categories, it could be anything. But I've just said, tell me the top 4 by my value in this case. So if they exist in this set, if they're the top 4, then they'll be in that calculation, it'll show their name, otherwise they're just branded into this other group. So this is a great way if you have lots and lots of dimensions, or you want it to be dynamic. just to change those names, make sure that the people that you're focused your view on should be at the top, everyone else should be gray. The last thing just to point out is to make this work, I've just made time a context filter. So if that's new to you, you should check out the order of operations session that will be on at some point. And basically it just means that this happens before the set. Cool. So a few examples of this, just again in the community. I will hammer home this point that there is so much good stuff out there that you should all be looking at and stealing, creatively borrowing. This is an example, again, from Andy Kriebel. This looks at national parks in the US, and what it allows you to do is select the national parks that you're interested in seeing. And then if you've selected them, they'll come up in color, and again, it just shows that relative color against everybody else. Another example, again, comes from Ava Murray, and this is looking at pollution and air quality and every single point in time. And then what you can actually see is the bits that you really care about, so the bits where it's unsensitive or unhealthy for sensitive groups, unhealthy or very unhealthy, and they're the ones in color, and you can just ignore the good because nobody really cares when it's good, it's good. The last one comes from David Perez. So David Perez actually won an Iron Viz entry contest last year with this entry, and I was judging at the time and thought this was incredible use of color. And although it's not quite gray, it's a bluey gray color, but we won't get into the specifics. Just having this comparison heat map of time and those kind of fade into the grays, it doesn't take long to recognize that Greater Lisbon and the Algarve are far more popular than with tourists than Madeira and Alentejo. I don't know. So how do you start bringing out color in other ways? What can you use to actually drive out this color? The first is by Interworks. It's called the color tool for Tableau. This lets you set a color and get lots of related colors. There's one called Coolers. It's out on the internet. It does the same thing, so you can see an example down here. You pick your color and then it goes, these colors would go great with this color. And it all forms from this kind of color wheel type concept where things are complementary and clashing. If you're fairly new to Tableau and you're not familiar with this, it's just making you aware that you can pick your color through double-clicking on things. It feels fairly hidden. It's going to be less fairly hidden in the future. But just this idea that you can pick and take colors from things like your own company logo. So if you have a great company logo and you just kind of want to steal the colors that are on this, use the pick screen color, because people have probably been paid a fortune to design your company's logo. Just, again, creatively borrow their work. Another thing you can do in this window is you can actually just dull some colors down with saturation as well, right in this window. So in summary, color's a bit of a weapon, and a really powerful one at that. You can draw out lots of really key value just using color alone, but it can and must be used wisely. If you want a good color to balance everything else against, use gray. It's a great way to balance things out and just draw away attention from things that you don't want people looking at. So the next topic is, oh my God, a mistake. Just kidding. The next topic is why text matters. So titles are the first thing when it comes to text. But obviously, when you're building a dashboard, there's the visualization aspect, the charts. But if we remember that kind of grid in UX and UI, one of the things is making it digestible and clear to your audience. And using text wisely is a good way to do that. So unless if you can somehow magically avoid it, come and talk to me afterwards, because I'd love to know how you do it. Everyone is constantly bombarded with news all the time, whether it's real or fake. We won't get into that argument here. But generally, it's always the same type of format. So you've come to almost expect a certain way to read text. So if we break this down slightly and look at this Pokemon Go article, almost every news article, bit of text that you read follows this concept that there's a title. And beneath the title, there's a subtitle that means that if you've read that title and it interests you, then you can follow the subtitle and it'll explain it a bit more in terms of what's the thing that you're about to look at. And then finally, you get to the content. If we apply this to a dashboard, so this is, again, something on public looking at politics, there's a title, there's the content, and there's some guidance around the dashboard that tells your users, hey, you can do this here, or maybe do this here. In this case, it's just saying you can select your borough using this parameter. Taking this great example that comes from Robert Rouse, this is looking at, again, politics, this time in the US, and how much politics is widening away from the center. It uses that same format, so there's a title, us versus them, it introduces the topic. There's the subtitle describing where the data comes from, just a bit of a blurb that drives this view. And then you get into the content. And again, because this isn't a standard view as such, it isn't a normal way to view data in a way that's going to be instantly recognizable for everyone, those bits of guidance that hit you right at the start as you go down this view are probably the most important things on this view. Because the moment you read them and go, oh, okay, I kind of understand what this means now, it just means that the rest of this content is enabled. One last one, purely because there's a rule that if you do CrossFit, you have to talk about CrossFit. I do CrossFit. Again, follows the same format, title, subtitle, and just guidance, because as much as a bell chart is interesting for some people, without explaining what it means, then you're not quite sure where good and bad is, where things lie in this spectrum. Oh, subtitle should have come first. Now, this is an example from Chris Love and the community that turns this whole thing on its head. And this was his entire visualization. So there is a title there, but that's it. There's no text on this whatsoever. Now, the whole purpose of this view has been created to draw out that content, to draw out the things that you should be interacting with to kind of complete this view. But there is text on this view other than the title and that little blurb at the top that makes this view complete, that it wouldn't make sense without it, and that's the tooltips. So for example, if we hover over that orange square, we'll see that the word nah features in Hey Jude 84 times. Is it a word? It still counts. But tooltips are really, really powerful to say, basically, this is my view, and if you want to know the numbers behind it or anything else, then hover over and look at the tooltips. So this example comes from Jewel Laurie in the community as well, and it was looking at baby names over time. And if we look at this view, it's looking at the names of Linda, that's my mum's name, and we can see that before she was born, 90,000 babies. There was a huge spike because of something Linda related that showed a dramatic spike of 855% year over year. But without hovering over, that's just the line chart. But then if you want that additional information, you can hover over, interact with a view, and draw it out. Rather than trying to overload the view with a year-over-year view or little spikes that show up and down, just make it come to life when you hover over and interact, when you actually look at the points you're interested in. There's another example here. This is something I built because I'm very sad. Looking at Nintendo games over time. And this one just shows that when you hover over the point, it tells you what that game is, when it was released, what system it was on, and how much it sold. So fun fact for you there, Super Mario Bros. Sold more than any other Nintendo game. There's a pre-switch though, so I don't know if it's changed. So where are we right now? The last time I presented this, Viz and Tooltips was just coming to life, but it's right now, it's a thing. So the first is this ability to select categories within Tooltips. This is one of those features that was released in 10.4 and I see very rarely used, but is actually really powerful, and I'll show you an example of it in just a second. Because I'm also going to show you Viz in Tooltips. This is something from a dashboard that's on public that I actually use to drive my own investment choices. I'm a terrible investor. Do not use this dashboard to try and make money. It doesn't work. But it has really pretty Viz in Tooltips, if you want that as an example. Some of my Viz in Tooltips I feel are better designed than people's dashboards, so that's a big statement. So I'll jump into the demo quickly and show you briefly what I'm talking about. So in this view here, we've got 333,500 records showing stock changes over time. So to briefly talk about it, the wider they are, the further outwards they are, then the more volatile they were on that day. The higher up they are, the higher value in their own currency they are. It's a bit of a skew because some British stocks are in pence, US ones are in dollars. But if I hover over any one of these points, oh, and this is every single day, by the way, for these stocks. There's one here which is Whitbread. Just by hovering over, I can see that they had a day where there was a significant change in the stock value. But if I want to know what their average change is over time, just using this view, what I can do is select them. And you can see there's a kind of an underlined thing when I go over Whitbread there. And if I select that, that's every single point that is Whitbread on this view. And now you can see the trend line has updated, so I know that over the scope of this data, Whitbread's average change was a 0.07% increase. And I can see all the points and how volatile it was. So that's one interesting way that you can add that layer of interactivity into your view and perform that level of analysis. But something else you can do is Viz in Tooltips. So this is a great way of drilling into the information to show something relevant to the views that you're looking at. And if I look at this very quickly, all this has been built is date on the top, filtered for the last 6 months, the close value of each and every stock there as a line. Now let me show you what happens to this when I introduce this as a Viz in Tooltip. So if I go to my Tooltips window, and that's popped over here, what I can do, let's zoom in, is as of 10.5 and up, if I go to Insert, I can see this concept of sheets. So this lets me bring in any other sheet that I've got within my dashboard and just add it as a Viz in Tooltip. So if I say, let's look at the 6-month tooltip, I'm actually going to set the max height. I don't want it to be too big, to 200. So you can change these parameters to define how it looks like in the tooltip. And you can also set what it should be filtered by. So I actually only want it to filter by name. So that means it's going to pass through the name of the stock to that sheet that we had before. We've got our height parameters. So now if I press OK and hover over one of these points here, see, I now have that neat little spark line that's showing me the past 6 months value behind that individual point. So I can see that this one had a high change value. I can still select it and see every other point that relates to it, but I'm also seeing that 6 months value of trend. So that's a unique way that you can add that extra layer of kind of design view into what you're actually building. Now, so text can be key, and it should always be used in an obvious way, in a way that's going to guide your audience to what they're actually viewing. Tooltips are also incredibly powerful and should just be used to just bring out that additional layer of insight into whatever it is that you're actually looking at. Now the final bit that I'm going to cover today is layout and chart types. Now this is something that the Financial Times has created. It's a really, really interesting concept, which is they've got this thing called the visual vocabulary. Now they're a newspaper, so they have to surface data to an audience, quite a large audience, on a daily basis to try and bring to life data and give it a story. Basically what all of you in this audience should be doing. And they've kind of bucketed into categories. If you're doing a certain type of analysis, then there is a correct or familiar chart type that should be used for that purpose. So very quickly, if you're doing change over time analysis, you should probably use a line chart. If you're ranking things against each other, then a bar chart's acceptable. It's going to feel familiar, it's going to feel basic, but that's the whole point behind it. And this is a great reference guide that you can use. But there's something else that fits in here, which comes from possibly the funniest meme that I've seen used in this way, from the visual editor at The Guardian. So some of you may be familiar with this meme. It's the distracted boyfriend meme. It ends up with things like this. For those of you that have cats, you'll always know that cats prefer boxes than the things that you buy for them. But they applied this to visual design. And I love this so much. So for those of you that have gone through this journey, it starts with this idea that there is the best chart for the data, but sometimes it's so tempting to just use that Stranger Things fancy data viz that's just walked past. How this looks like in Tableau is you could be just showing sales versus profit. The best way is probably a bar chart with profit on color. It shows the value differences. It speaks to the audience. But sometimes that exploding bubble chart just draws the eye in. And it's not a great way of showing it, but oh my God, it's so pretty. I won't cover a lot of time on this point, but just so you know, ShowMe actually tries to build this type of visual best practice into the ShowMe engine. But as you know, if you've used ShowMe, it doesn't always get it right. For example, I built a viz on the Grand National, so a big horse race that's here. And there is no ShowMe horse racing chart, sadly. I talk to the dev team on a daily basis, and they still won't put it in. But it all comes through to this concept that if you understand the visual engine, then it gives you this unlimited design potential. So how do you actually build a horse racing chart, for example? And I'm going to demo this super quickly because it is completely 100% relevant for your businesses. Oh, this is actually going to be really challenging from here. I'm going to have to zoom in. So let's say I'm looking at the Grand National data set. And what I can do is I'm just going to put all my horses onto detail. That's the thing I'm looking at. Going back right to the start, the first question is, what are my horses? My next question might be, what is their career earnings potential? So I can go down here and see, okay, there's a value here for prize money. How much money have they earned over time? And I'll just put that out here. I'm just going to make these circles for now. That's the start of our horse racing chart, believe it or not. It's kind of already there. If you think about what you've actually generated, you've got things that are racing to the end. How do we separate them? So a neat little trick just to say I don't have anything I want to order them by, so I'm just going to put an index and set this so it's against my horse names. Are we almost there? You can almost start to see it. The next thing is these need to be horses. Racing circles just isn't as exciting. It doesn't speak to the audience. So I can change these shapes. Go more shapes. Oh, that's one thing I was missing. I just need to put horse name onto shapes. And then this is actually taking the suspense away. It was accidentally already assigned. But you can go to more shapes and then just assign your horses. Fun fact, I got a colleague of mine, because I just don't have the time, to color in each horse so its jockey matches up to its color. I felt really bad afterwards because it took them a long time. And then the last thing is, obviously, horses racing in snow probably doesn't give the same thing, so let's just change the format and then, again, zoom in. Let's just change this worksheet color to a light green. There we go. So a horse racing chart in Tableau that you can use to show your sales metrics or how your sales team are performing against each other in a few easy clicks. Completely relevant. Just appeared. So the question was, where do I get the horses pictures? Just got a PNG of horse racing from Google Images, stuck it into my shapes repository folder in my documents, and then we have horses. Sadly, not standard to Tableau just yet. Another side point is, because I love transparency so much, the only thing I didn't do is I didn't add the background of the kind of thing that looks like a race course. That comes from background images, but in the future you'll have transparency, so you won't even need that. You can float your horses over just any racing track image that you see fit to use. Now there's an important point here which shouldn't be missed, which is this concept of design versus efficiency. So where should you take the limits of design, and what should just be the most efficient thing for what you're doing? And it comes, so this is from Rodi Zakovic. He created this awesome Queen Viz. And it's got that iconic Freddie Mercury image at the bottom to kind of show and set the scene for this Viz. Now something that's interesting here, which is if you take away the Queen logo and Freddie Mercury from this view, this could kind of be talking about anything. And it doesn't really, it doesn't really speak out or add anything. And Rodi actually kind of went on this design journey. He's got a blog out there, which is Data, Tableau, and Me. He covers this in this blog, which is really interesting to read, which is he won Viz of the Week for this view and became obsessed with this concept of curving every line that he possibly could, because curved lines are so much prettier than straight lines. And then he got to this point, got to this point and basically said, okay, enough is enough, I'm curved too many lines, and went back to square one for a makeover Monday, where he built this. So it's the same potato story that we saw earlier. And he went, actually, if I just go back to trying, rather than trying to show off design, and just try and bring the message to the forefront, then this is the best way to display that. So this is probably more appropriate for your businesses and everything else. But it's just that each bar is a year of potato production, and it's just red if it's less than the previous year. So you can immediately see where the potato production has dropped in each one of these different countries. It's simple. And sometimes simple is enough. Now when it comes to layout and picking your chart type, there's something that I just want to highlight that came in 10.4, which may be new to some of you, which is this concept of margins and padding that we introduced. It lets you kind of give space between your individual chart types. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that in the past this was slightly hard. It was pretty difficult to get your charts to lay out this way. You'd either have to have them floating or do what I did here, which is put text boxes and color those individual text boxes. It's not fun. But in 10.4, this is the same, to create the exact same view. You can see all those text things go away, and you can still have tiled and structure it in a way that's just a lot better from an experience perspective. So that's that comparison of what layout objects did we have pre 10.4 and post 10.4. And I love it. So on layout and chart types, you should always ask yourself, does the layout you're choosing, the charts you're choosing, meet your audience's requirements? Are they going to be delighted by this? Are they expecting to see this in a particular way? Does it display the answer you're looking to actually show them in an effective way? And if you do this, use 10.4 to give some space, all of these concepts will eventually lead you to going to Iron Viz maybe next year. And if you think that's ridiculous, Klaus, who is on stage at Iron Viz this year, hadn't even started using Tableau a year ago today, and he is on stage tomorrow and is a genius. I'm also his sous Vizzes, so I'm going to give him lots of cred. He deserves it. So to recap, Tableau's turned everybody into a designer. Design, UI, UX, these are concepts that you constantly need to keep in mind now. But you should always follow those basic principles for success, which is, does the story, does the color, the text and titles, layout and chart types, does it meet my audience's needs and meet it in a way that they expect to see it? Does it delight them? And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Tom, this is great. This is all good stuff, but I want more. I want so much more. And the truth behind this is when I sat down and tried to design this topic, there are so many things that you can tweak and adjust and add to your view to draw out all of this insight and information. I've even used some of them in the list just to prove that they exist and stand out. But this alone kind of leads to one last story to leave you with, which is, I referenced it before, but I created a view just for my own trading purposes. And I spent a few days on it, came up with this, and went, I'm really pleased with this. I've got my flags that I'm interested in seeing. It shows some highlight actions when I select those different flags so I can see the story behind each stock. And then I published it on Twitter because I was really pleased with it. And then I noticed something that just kind of bugged me ever so slightly. So I don't know if any of you can see it there. It's right there. I spelled between wrong twice. I don't know how. I don't know what between means. And actually the truth behind this is I used this for a while. I used this for a few months. And then I went, it doesn't actually meet my own needs. It's not real. As my understanding of the stock market grew, and as I tried to use the dashboard, I was like, well, actually, I don't care about certain elements. So I redesigned it again and put the buy-sell flags at the top and changed the view and the scope that I was looking at. And this is an important point that I haven't covered, but it applies to every single topic, which is, yes, you can focus on the story. Yes, the colors, the text, the layout, and all those things that I listed out. But the truth is you're always limited by time. And the great thing with Tableau is you always have that fast iteration, fast failure, that you can always just try things. And if it doesn't work, scrap it. Do it again. So always keep that in mind. Don't think you're on a fixed path. Don't be afraid to just can things, start again, because sometimes that's where your best work comes from. So just as I finish, I just want to give thanks to these people. You should check them out on Twitter. That's their Twitter handles, as well as on Tableau Public. Really smart, really great people creating some things that I'm really jealous of. Get on Tableau Public yourselves. And then very, very lastly, there is, which you'll get told about lots, in the app today, if you go to the description, there's a link at the bottom of it. Please, please, please give us feedback. Do it immediately. Tell us all the great and the awful things from the sessions, because it's the only way we'll learn. So thank you for your time. I'm here for questions if anyone wants to come up afterwards. Otherwise, get on with your day, get more free coffee, and thank you very much.